We have to take a little bit of a dive into forms, and we're going to show some live code here in a moment. But basically, we already said that creating or editing a resource takes two interactions. The first one is to serve the form itself, and the second one is to receive, in some sense, the posting of the form data. So in the case of creating, it would be the new action. In the case of updating, it would be the edit action. And then there's create or update that actually handles the submission. And we have a route for each of these, right? So we have a route for each of these four possible actions. And now let's look at the code and how you actually generate and display the forms, how you specify which action is going to receive the form posting, and how to get the values that are filled in by the user. So how does the user communicate stuff that becomes part of a resourceful operation? So let us take a look at some code. Okay, so now I am going to start the actual server so that we can interact with it through a web browser. And let's make the... Okay, so let's see. Rails server, listening on port 3000, great. I'm going to go to localhost 3000. What am I going to see? Before I hit return, someone should guess. You said the home page. Which home page do you mean? Yay, you're on Rails. Why don't I see anything related to movies, given that I'm showing, here's my code. Let me make this a little bit larger. There we go. I have a movies controller with a bunch of stuff in it. This is the app that's running. Why am I not seeing anything that looks like it has any relationship to my app? Because the route is Exactly. I haven't actually specified any of the routes in the app, and we can examine what they are. Let's open another tab here. If I say Rails routes, so here's a list of all the routes that my app should recognize. I can say get/movies. I can say get/movies/ID, :ID. But the route that I've actually specified in the browser is nothing. It's just /. It's the root route. And when you create a new Rails app, by default, the root route points to this happy little page that says you're on Rails. Be sure to delete that before you deploy your app to customers, or you're going to look really, really silly. But now we'll use an actual route. So what happened here, and let's make this a little larger so that it's kind of legible, /movies. Well, if I look at the, what route matches that, I used get and /movies. Don't worry too much about the dot format. We'll explain that a bit later. And this is going to map to the movies controller and to a method or a controller action named index. Let us see what is there. Here's my controller. And helpfully, these comments were put in by Rails itself when I said, please scaffold a basic controller for me, and I will fill in and modify it later. Here is the index action, and all it does is call the all method of active record and say, just give me a list of all movies. Clearly, if you're IMDb, this wouldn't work. We'd need to do something a little more sophisticated, where we could say something like, give me the first 20, or give me the 20 most recent, or the 20 highest rated. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, it's still an index action because you're asking to show the contents of a collection. You might just want to specify some filters on it, right? But this is kind of the world's simplest controller action. And what if I look at the code that generated this HTML page? Well, I can view source in my browser, and I can see that each one of these movies has an edit link, and each of these edit links essentially points to a resourceful route that would edit that specific movie. So this is a really early example of those route helpers, because if I look at, views, movies, show. And again, remember, how do I know which HTML view is being rendered? Well, for the index action, it's going to be the one called index.html.erb. Again, let's make this a little larger so that it's readable. So what do I have? Well, remember that the controller called movie.all to return a thing that quacks like a collection. So I am iterating over that collection with each, as we've already seen in Ruby. And for each movie, I'm just outputting as part of a table cell its title, its rating, and a couple of links. So What am I linking to? Well, as an example for the edit action, this is making a little bit wider so it's visible here. I'm linking to edit movie path for that movie. What does that even mean? It's one of the helpers. If we go back to Rails routes, here is edit. And when I list the routes, it is helpfully showing me not only do I have a route for get/movies/id/edit, which will take me to the edit action of the controller, but in addition, it's reminding me that there is a helper method called editMoviePath that I can use to generate that back, right? And again, why couldn't I just sort of, in my loop here, I probably could have said something like, and I'm showing you this as an example of what not to do, but right, in principle, this would also have worked. Right? There's nothing in principle preventing me from doing this and sort of explicitly putting the route in there. Like I'm basically manually constructing a route that matches what the edit movie route should look like. But if I do that, and then if at any point in the future I want to change the way that the routes are constructed in my routes file, now I would have to go find every view where I did something like this and make sure that they all get modified. So the reason to use these helpers is that the helpers are based on what's in the routes file in the first place. That's why this is what you will usually see. And there's a lot of things like this in Rails where you'll look at it, the first time you look at it, you're like, why does it do that? That seems more complicated than necessary. And when you're looking at a really simple app, often it is more complicated than necessary, but it's there because most apps aren't simple. And once you get beyond just having one or two models, then it becomes very clear right away why these mechanisms exist to sort of protect you from having to, have this morass of unmaintainable code. So in some of these cases, I'm going to say, stick with us and have some faith that when you see a feature and you're like, why did they do that? It's like one extra thing to remember. It's there for a reason. It's just sometimes with a really, really simple app that we're starting with, you can't see the reason right away. Okay, so what would happen if we tried to create a new movie? Well, let's see. What does the new action actually do? Remember that when we showed that there's multiple ways in Active Record to create a new instance of something, one of them was to call the new method of the models class, and that sort of gives us back a blank object. It's a thing that has the correct class, and it knows what its attributes should be, but the initial attributes don't have any values. They're all just sort of set to nil. So it's going to create a new movie, and then it's going to render a view. And through convention over configuration, we know what that view is going to be. It's just going to be in the views/movies/new. And again, I'll make this a little bit larger. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to bring this up in the browser, and we're going to look at the HTML side by side with the Rails view code that generated it. So if we go back to our browser, and I'm going to click the new movie link, which has a route that has been constructed so as to take me to the correct page. And sure enough, I have a form for a new movie. So what's the correspondence between what we're seeing here and what's in the code? Well, I'm going to use view source so we can look at the actual HTML corresponding to this. And once we skip over some of the HTML boilerplate, this is sort of where the, you'll forgive the pun, where the action is. See what I did there? You're welcome. I'm here all day. So when you specify a form, now we're in the HTML world, right? HTML says when you have a form, one of the things that you need to specify immediately when you open the form is what is the route to which the form is going to submit. And a route has two parts. It's got an HTTP method and it's got a URI. Here's the HTTP method. So it says when the user submits the form, it's going to generate a post action. And that post action is going to post to this URI. With that information, we can verify by going back to our list of routes that indeed, if we have a post HTTP method and we have this/movies as the route string, that is going to go to the movies controller and the create action. So far so good. We have a form that says when submitted, that's what's going to happen. It will cause Rails to send us into the create action. And as we'll show you, the params array will now contain not only the things that got parsed out of the URI, if any, but also the values that are in the form itself. This is where things get kind of cool. Because I said, think of a form as a way to interact with a resource. The form is really just there to be a placeholder for how to display and how to allow the user to modify the attributes of that resource. So in our case, the movie resource has a title, it has a rating, I think it has a submit date, but we're not going to care about that right now. So here is a Rails method. This is part of the sort of things that Rails views can do, right? I'm saying, I want to create a form that is designed to edit an instance of this model. By the way, how is Rails going to know, what class the instance of the model is? It can just ask it. You can ask any Rails object what its class is. And so the underlying methods in the Rails view will basically be able to figure out what kinds of things would make sense for editing a movie in place. And with the object that is yielded from this, I can now say things like, okay, I want a text field for the movie's title, and I want a label that is associated with it that shows what that text field is for. By the way, that is useful not only for being human readable like this, but also for assistive technologies like screen readers and so forth, to be able to associate informative labels with form fields. I also want a text field for the movie rating, and I want a label next to that that shows the word rating. And then I want a submit button. And by the way, the submit button here says create movie. Everything you're seeing can be customized, but I'm trying to show the very basic version of what happens here. But the thing that I'd like you to notice, and when we submit the form, by the way, I'm going to show you a really useful trick, which is I'm going to put a debugger statement right at the beginning of the controller method that receives the form so we can stop and look, inspect the world. But this is the cool thing that I would like to show you. Look at the way that these form fields are named. Movie square brackets title is a form field. Movie square brackets rating is a form field, right? This HTML code was generated by calling form.textfield in these cases. So it's Rails doing that this has happened. It's not something that I manually put in. This HTML is being generated by the Rails helper methods for form creation. Here's why this is cool. And to show you, we're going to actually submit the form. But before we press the submit button, I'm going to go into the controller. And here is the create action that we have already verified. When we submit the form, we know this is where it's going to go, because we know what the HTTP method is. We know what the form URI is. We can look that up in the routes table. So I have put a debugger statement right at the beginning of this controller method so we can stop and look at the world. Okay, here we go. Create, boom. And if I now go to my terminal window where the app is running, sure enough, I have dropped into the controller, and I'm at the line following the debugger method. This is a really useful thing to do. Debugging like in the controller so you can sort of stop the world and take a look at what's going on. So I'm going to look at params, which, as I claimed, it's not as pretty as I would like. And without worrying too much about this authenticity token, which I will explain in just a moment, this is the part of params that I'm interested in. Because now what I can see is that I look at just params movie. What is this? It's a hash. This is really cool. Because of the form fields having names like movie brackets title and movie brackets rating, Rails uses that as a cue to say, aha, all of these things that have a common name followed by dereferencing and brackets, you must be editing the attributes of this kind of object. I will helpfully gather those things into a hash for you so that what I get is a hash whose key is movie and whose value is the key value pairs of all the attributes that came from my form field. Why is this cool? Because when we were looking at Active Record, what does Active Record expect when you create a new object or when you edit one? It expects a hash of the values you want to modify, right? So this is all of this machinery is to say, movies are a RESTful resource, and all of the ways that you manipulate forms and actions according to the, corresponding to that RESTful resource are designed to make it easy to do these resource level operations. So if I have a form, and if I have said that this is a form for a model called movie, then Rails will cause the fields to be named in such a way that when I get them back in params, they're already collected into a hash for me, and they are almost ready to assign to Active Record. I say almost because there's one more thing we have to do, but before we do it, I'm going to pause. Briefly, let's go over where we are, and then we will continue with our controller action. But to create a submittable form, right? And remember, a form is really just a way of operating on a resource. We have to have an action that serves the form itself. In a typical resource-oriented app, that'll be like the new action will serve a blank form, or the edit action for serving a form that corresponds to an object already existing. We also need an action that is going to receive the form submission. Typically, that'll be create or update. And in the example that we're doing now, we're following the action of the create route. And make sure that there is a route for each of those actions, and that there is a view that corresponds to each of those actions that can be rendered. And the cool thing is that if you're using the Rails form helpers to say, this form is for this kind of model, and models are resources, then all of the form element names are going to be chosen so that they get collected into a single hash for you at the time that you receive the form, and you're almost ready to just grab that hash and pass it to Active Record as the new object attributes to be created, or similarly, the existing object attributes that are about to be updated. And this example that I'm walking you through, again, Rails has a lot of form helpers, but you almost never have to do things like naming form fields yourself. It's more like you're telling Rails what the form is going to be used to do, and Rails will create form names that minimize the work that you have to do to unpack those parameters when you get them submitted to your app, which is very, very cool. So the common case is the form is used to create or edit a resource. So the form field names will correspond to the attribute names. The resource class will tell us what path to submit to. So because it's a form for a movie, we can submit it to movies path. The HTTP verb determines the action. So the action plus the URI gives you the complete route. And the params are already sort of parsed in a way that is just about ready to pass to Active Record, which we're going to do next.